For countless believers across the world, the Bible is not merely a book. It is the eternal and immutable truth of God Himself, the divine word passed down through generations, the Holy Testament, the sacred scriptures upon which faith, law, and morality have been built. For centuries, entire civilizations have risen and fallen under its shadow. Kings have ruled by invoking its authority, and ordinary men and women have sought comfort, guidance, and salvation within its pages. From the very beginning, however, the Bible has been surrounded by questions. Questions about what it truly means, about how faithfully its message has been preserved, and about whether the stories it tells are history, allegory, or something far more complex. Theologians, scholars, skeptics, and believers alike have wrestled with its words, debating the accuracy of its translations, the intent of its authors, and the layers of symbolism hidden within each verse. Yet, despite centuries of study, one troubling question refuses to disappear. Have the Bible's original messages survived the endless process of copying, translation, editing, and deliberate revision? Or has the passage of time, along with the hands of those who shaped it, left us with a text that only faintly resembles the words once spoken or recorded? For many, the answer is simple and unwavering. They declare, this is God's will, written plainly in Scripture. It cannot be questioned. But the reality is far more complicated. While the Bible may indeed be divinely inspired, it is also undeniably marked by human intervention. Every word has passed to the hands of scribes, translators, and councils of men who decided what would be preserved and what would be discarded. To use the Bible as an unquestionable foundation for any cause, without recognizing the human fingerprints scattered throughout its history, is to step onto dangerous ground. Even more unsettling is the fact that we do not know, with absolute certainty, who wrote many of its books. Much of the New Testament remains shrouded in anonymity. The names we attach to the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are traditions, not signatures. The true identities of the writers remain hidden in the mists of history. And when we admit that no eyewitness could have recorded the creation of the world, we are forced to confront the fact that parts of the Bible were written long after the events they describe, shaped by the beliefs and agendas of those who preserved them. Still, the Bible remains one of the most influential works in human history. Its words have shaped cultures, inspired revolutions, and offered hope to the hopeless. Its stories are etched into art, music, and literature. Its commandments have been used to bind societies together, and tragically, to divide them as well. But beyond its well-known passages and familiar verses, could also contain secrets, hidden covenants between God and His people, shadowy figures barely mentioned, or even entire texts that were suppressed, left out, or forgotten altogether. Now, for the first time, an extraordinary investigation seeks to challenge everything we think we know about the Bible. It will examine its hidden history, the contradictions buried in its pages, and the mysteries that still puzzle scholars to this day. The journey begins in the arid wilderness of Qumran, in the year 1947. The land was still under British rule in what was then mandatory Palestine. It was here, among the barren cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, that a Bedouin shepherd stumbled upon a discovery that would forever change our understanding of the Bible. While searching for a lost goat, he entered a cave and found large clay jars sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Inside, wrapped in linen and preserved against time, were 7 fragile scrolls, written not on ordinary paper, but on ancient parchment and papyrus that crumbled at the touch. What scholars uncovered was not simply an archaeological curiosity, but a treasure of unparalleled religious significance. These were texts older than any version of the Bible known at the time. They revealed glimpses of the scriptures, as they existed a full millennium earlier than the oldest manuscripts previously available. For the first time, researchers could see the words as they had been written by Jewish communities living in the very land and the very era in which Jesus himself had walked. The find would be remembered as the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Preserved in the dryness of the caves, these manuscripts open a window into the spiritual life of ancient Judaism, the roots of Christianity, and the very foundations of Western faith. Within the scrolls were fragments of nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, 38 of the 39, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Each fragment carried not only words but history, variations, commentaries, and alternate renderings that showed how Scripture had been transmitted, debated, and shaped long before it was bound into the Bible we recognize today. The discovery forced scholars and believers alike to confront an unsettling reality. The Bible was not a single, fixed book preserved untouched across the centuries. It was a living, evolving collection of writings, influenced by the people who copied it, interpreted it, and decided which voices would echo through time and which would be silenced. The story of David and Goliath stands as one of the most iconic narratives in the entire biblical tradition, a tale retold in churches, classrooms, and homes across the globe. It has become the ultimate metaphor for the triumph of the weak over the powerful, of faith over brute force, of the underdog defeating an enemy that by all human standards should have been invincible. According to the well-known account, David is not a soldier nor a seasoned warrior, but merely a shepherd boy. He carries no armor, no sword, no shield. His only weapon is a simple sling and 5 smooth stones gathered from a nearby brook. On the battlefield, he faces Goliath, a towering Philistine giant clad in bronze armor, whose very presence terrifies the armies of Israel. Against this seemingly unstoppable force, David stands armed only with faith in God and the courage born of conviction. The biblical text describes a moment of confrontation with vivid detail. David fits a stone into his sling, swings it with precision, and releases it toward the giant. The projectile strikes Goliath in the forehead, and the mighty warrior collapses to the ground. The book of 1 Samuel 17 verses 49 to 50 makes the outcome clear. Goliath falls lifeless, slain by nothing more than the shepherd's stone. The passage even underscores a miracle by noting that David had no sword in his hand. The victory is presented as divine, not human. Proof that faith alone, not earthly weapons, secures triumph. Yet, the narrative does not end there. The very next verse introduces a troubling shift. We are told that David rushes to the fallen Philistine, draws Goliath's own massive sword from its sheath, and severs his head. And once again, the text declares that David killed him. Suddenly, we are left with 2 versions of Goliath's death, one by the stone, the other by the sword. This raises unsettling questions. Did the giant perish in the first blow, or was it the decapitation that ended his life? And why would the text present both accounts side by side, as if one were not sufficient? The contradictions only deepen as we move further into the scriptures. In 2 Samuel 21, an entirely different detail emerges. Here, the killer of Goliath is not David at all, but a warrior named Elhanan. The passage plainly attributes the slaying of the Philistine giant to this obscure figure, casting doubt on a story that has been immortalized for centuries as David's defining moment. This leads to an inevitable question. Who truly killed Goliath? Was it David, the shepherd destined to become Israel's most celebrated king? Or was it Elhanan, a lesser-known warrior whose name is preserved in the text but largely forgotten in tradition? Scholars have long debated these discrepancies. Some propose that the contradiction arose from a simple scribal error, that an early copyist mistakenly inserted Elhanan's name into the passage, and that later editors struggled to reconcile the mistake with the established narrative. Others suggest a far more intriguing possibility, that there were originally 2 different traditions, 2 different heroes, and 2 different stories of Philistine giants' defeat. Over time, these separate traditions may have merged, with David's fame and royal legacy absorbing the victory into his legend, while Elhanan's role was reduced to a footnote. But even this theory opens doors to larger, more unsettling implications. If one of the most celebrated events in the Bible, a story taught as the ultimate lesson in faith and courage, contains such contradictions, what does that say about the reliability of other biblical narratives? Are we dealing with historical fact, legendary embellishment, or a blending of both? The David and Goliath account, when examined closely, forces us to confront the messy reality of ancient storytelling. It reveals the process of oral tradition, where tales were told and retold, shaped by the communities that preserved them. It shows how memory, myth, and identity became intertwined, transforming a localized skirmish into a universal parable of hope. And it demonstrates how the Bible, far from being a static text, is a living document, layered with additions, revisions, and interpretations that span centuries. For millions of believers, The story remains sacred, regardless of these contradictions. It is not the historical detail that matters, but the spiritual message that faith can overcome fear, that God delivers the weak from the hands of the strong. Yet for historians and textual scholars, the inconsistencies cannot be ignored. They stand as evidence of the Bible's complex journey from oral tale to written scripture, shaped by human hands as much as by divine inspiration. Ultimately, the question lingers in the air. Where does the truth of David and Goliath lie? Is it in the stone that struck the giant down, in the sword that cut off his head, or in the blurred space between history and legend? And perhaps most importantly, what other hidden tensions, forgotten names, and unexplored mysteries remain buried in the pages of the Bible, waiting to be uncovered? In Genesis 1 verse 28, we read God's command to humanity, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." This divine instruction was given to Adam and Eve, setting the foundation for the growth of all mankind. Now, when we connect this with the story of Cain, a question naturally arises. Could Cain's wife simply have been part of this very command? In other words, was she one of the many descendants of Adam and Eve, born as humanity began to expand according to God's plan? The Bible does not list every son and daughter of Adam and Eve, but Genesis 5 verse 4 tells us clearly that they had other sons and daughters. This could explain how Cain found a wife after leaving Eden. She would not be a stranger or from another creation, but rather part of the family line that came directly from the first human couple, fulfilling God's original command to multiply and fill the earth. This perspective invites us to reflect. When the Bible leaves certain details unsaid, could be because the answer is already rooted in God's greater command? Could Cain's wife simply be a testimony of how seriously humanity obeyed God's very first directive, to bring forth life and spread across the earth? Yet even with this explanation, the story of Cain's wife continues to intrigue and puzzle readers. The Bible gives us only the briefest glimpse, leaving much unsaid. Why does Scripture not name her? Why is her presence mentioned almost as a passing detail, yet so central to the unfolding of human history? Could it be that the text itself is inviting us to look beyond the surface, to consider not just who she was, but what her existence represents in the larger narrative of God's plan? Some scholars and theologians suggest that the absence of her name emphasizes the universality of her role. She could represent every early human being, the countless sons and daughters through whom humanity multiplied, spreading across the earth according to God's command. In this sense, her anonymity is not a flaw in the text, but a deliberate choice, a subtle reminder that much of God's work in the world happens quietly, beyond the spotlight, shaping history in ways we might overlook. And yet, questions continue to swirl. How did Cain and his wife navigate a world so young, so different from ours? What challenges awaited them as the first human couple left Eden, and as the early generations began to populate the earth? The sparse details leave room for the imagination, for speculation, and for reflection. Each reader is invited to fill in the gaps, to ponder the realities of early human life, guided by the framework of divine instruction. Furthermore, the story raises deeper, almost philosophical questions about obedience, destiny, and the unfolding of God's plan. Cain, marked by his earlier transgression, now carries the weight of continuing humanity. His choice of partner, his marriage, his descendants, all are silently intertwined with the fulfillment of God's original command. Every small decision, every personal relationship, becomes part of a larger divine tapestry, illustrating how human actions, even those shrouded in mystery, contribute to the realization of a greater purpose. The ambiguity surrounding Cain's wife also challenges us to confront the nature of Scripture itself. The Bible is not a conventional history book. It is a living narrative, layered with meaning, coded in stories, symbols, and omissions. By leaving certain details unsaid, it invites curiosity, reflection, and dialogue. Each unanswered question becomes an invitation to read more carefully, to seek understanding, and to engage with the text in a personal, contemplative way. Could it be that the silence of Scripture on Cain's wife is a profound lesson in itself? That sometimes the absence of information encourages us to explore deeper truths, to connect dots that are not explicitly drawn, and to recognize the quiet, invisible work of God in the midst of human life? Her story, though brief, reverberates through the ages, reminding us that even the smallest, most overlooked figures can carry immense significance in God's unfolding plan. In this light, Cain's wife becomes more than a historical curiosity. She becomes a symbol of mystery, of hidden purpose, and the profound ways in which God's command to be fruitful and multiply was fulfilled from the very beginning. Her presence, though understated, invites each of us to reflect. How often do we overlook the quiet actors in history, the hidden threads in the tapestry of faith, and the silent movements of God that shape the world in ways we may never fully see? And so, the story continues to whisper to us across the centuries, urging us to ask questions, to wonder, and to engage. Who was Cain's wife? What does her anonymity teach us about the unfolding of God's plan? And what other mysteries lie hidden within the sacred pages, waiting for those who are willing to look, reflect, and seek understanding? Thank you so much for watching this video on Peace Drawn. Your support means the world to us, and it inspires us to keep creating content that brings reflection, comfort, and understanding. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone who might need this message today, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Remember, Peace Drawn is a place for learning, spiritual reflection, and meaningful conversations. Stay connected, stay inspired, and may peace always be with you.